Well, welcome back to another episode of Redbird Rundown. I'm your host, Josh Jacobs. I'm also the site expert over at Redbird Rants, and I'm excited to do a little bit of a post-trade deadline recap with you all. Been a little bit of a hiatus last few weeks. Got married on July 22nd, which is exciting, but obviously the build-up to that was a little crazy, and I had my honeymoon after. So, lack of episodes recently. But I promise there are a lot coming. I've got an interview with a very exciting Cardinals prospect tomorrow that I think you all will be very interested in, as well as a couple of other interviews lined up, and then in general, just back to this weekly schedule of breaking down Cardinals content. So on the bright side, may have saved you a little bit of talking your ear off about potential Cardinals moves, and instead we could talk about what they actually did, right? There was a lot of rumors going into this trade deadline about what the Cardinals could do at the deadline. And then also there's a variety of things that they should do at the deadline. And overall, it seems like they lean more into the should category rather than the can. And I think a majority of that is because of how the market played out, which we'll get into that. But to briefly recap, I'll go through an overview of the major or all the deals they did make, and then we will address them kind of one by one, and I'll kind of give my overall thoughts on the deadline as well. So the Cardinals made a deal with the Toronto Blue Jays, one of multiple that they made, sending Jordan Hicks. Excuse me also for pronunciation on some of these. I meant to do some practice beforehand, so I'll get better at these as we go. But they traded reliever Jordan Hicks to the Blue Jays for Sam Roberts and Adam Kloffenstein. And then the same day, on Sunday, they made a move with the Rangers, trading both Jordan Montgomery and Chris Stratton for Katoa Roby, Thomas infielder Thomas Sagasi, and pretty much a throw-in lefty at this point, John King. So those are the two moves they made on Sunday, and then on deadline day, Tuesday, they made two more moves. Another move with the Toronto Blue Jays, sending shortstop Paul DeJong for Matt Savison, who's a reliever in high A ball. And then in the final minutes of the deadline, they traded Jack Flaherty to the Baltimore Orioles for Cesar Porteo, Drew Rom, and Zach Showalter. So let me just start off by going through kind of my general overview of what they did, and then I'll kind of work my way backwards, since I'm sure you've probably heard some recaps already about the moves they made on Sunday. Not as much content out there yet about the Flaherty or DeJong moves, but overall, I would have to wait a little bit till I give like a grade to the Cardinals deadline. I need to look more into the prospects they acquired, look more into some of the value they gave up and brought in. But overall, it's hard to say because you never really get to know what was available to the Cardinals, what was out there, what was even potential, because all of us can sit here and say, man, they really should have gone out and gotten a controllable starter for the 2023 rotation. But there was really only one legitimate starter with team control that was dealt at this deadline, and that was Aaron Cavall, who went to the Tampa Bay Rays for a top 30 prospect in all of baseball. And if the Cardinals had gotten him, that would have felt very underwhelming for most of you, most of the Cardinal Nation, even though he has been really good this year. So, I mean, it's clear the Mariners weren't going to deal one of their starters unless potentially they were overwhelmed by an offer. So if you put that in a box and say, man, I wish they could have done more to address the 2024 rotation to bring some certainty, but recognizing there probably wasn't a deal there to be made, I like what the Cardinals did at this deadline. I mean, overall, you can't really complain too much about what you get for rental players. Obviously, it's wise to go ahead and compare what are the different moves that were made. So compare the Jordan Montgomery and Chris Stratton deal to like the Lucas Giolito deal or the Lance Lynn deal. Like those are some comparable deals that were made that you can find some interesting tidbits on. But the market obviously went all over the place, right? You had a Max Scherzer and a Justin Verlander dealt. Sorry about that. I'm getting a little sick as well. And then you also had a variety of mid-tier players, mostly mid-tier players dealt at this deadline. Maybe the one miss, I wouldn't say even it's a maybe miss. The one miss that you could definitely point to is not clearing up some of the young bats. Now, if there wasn't a young starter with control available, then you definitely don't want them to have traded Gorman or Donovan or Newt Barr or Wynn or anyone like that, or even Tommy Edman. You don't really want them to deal him for just scrap parts or for a lesser return. You want them to go out and get that controllable starter with one of those bats. But it was kind of surprising to see them not go ahead and trade one of Tyler O'Neill or Dylan Carlson, or to part ways with an Alec Burleson or a Juan Yepes or Moises Gomez or some of these guys that just aren't getting opportunities really on a day-to-day basis. Now, pretty much all those names, I wouldn't say the Cardinals should be like running to get rid of them, right? Like, I really like Alec Burleson. I think he's going to be a productive big leaguer for a long time. Like, does he have some insanely high upside like Jordan Walker? No, but he's a quality left-handed bat already, and he can keep improving in that area. And left-handed bats with high contact and some power, those are pretty valuable in this league. And so you don't want to trade that guy away for nothing. Tyler O'Neill, I mean, I know that there's some people that just think he just needs to be gotten rid of at this point. And I think there is an argument for the way that he's kind of like himself and some of the other people are kind of clogging the ways. And just a note here, I see a notification from The Athletic calling the St. Louis Cardinals winners at the deadline. So that's interesting. I'll have to look more into that, talk about that as we go. But that's from their athletic staff there. But yeah, you look at, like, you don't really want to just get rid of guys that have value like that just to get rid of them. But Tyler O'Neill's a guy that didn't really have a lot of value. So why not give him a run for the rest of the year and see, okay, could he be one of my outfield options going into 2024? Not someone I depend on like I did in 2023. But if he pops off, awesome. If he gets injured, whatever. He wasn't worth anything. Or maybe he has a good run toward the end of the year and then he's someone they can trade in the offseason. Same with Dylan Carlson. I think most fans can agree his potential outweighs what the returns look like they could have been at this deadline. So again, it's going to be an issue if they don't give him actual run time in the outfield, which again is probably where you run into the young bat situation. But with Brendan Donovan's season-ending injury, that does clear some space. The trade of Paul DeJong helped with that some. We'll get more into Mason Wynn later. But in general, I think that's probably the one flaw of their thing. So if I had to give it a grade right now, I'd probably give it like a B, because they did what they needed to do. And I think they did what they needed to do well. But they didn't like, again, you have to pull off something where it's like, either you didn't see that coming, or it's a clear win, like they fleeced someone, or they went above and beyond, or were creative. That's like an A in my opinion. And I really think the only two teams that maybe could get A's are like the Chicago White Sox, who seem to sell really well on their talent. And then potentially Texas Rangers, although they did give up a lot for Scherzer and Montgomery. We'll get into the package a little bit. I feel like they gave up a decent amount there too. So, I mean, you never really fault a team for going for it, so that's a big encouragement. But at the same time, you know, they could look back on that later and not love the deals they made. Overall, I give the Cardinals like a B. You could probably go higher and say they got A for what they needed to do, but overall I'd say a B because they only really did what they needed to do. So let's start with the Jack Flaherty trade, which I think has like initially caught people off guard. I think people were like not the Orioles because they don't have pitching, like elite pitching prospects, which again, the Cardinals were not going to get elite pitching prospects for rentals. But they do have the best farm system in all of baseball. So when you're getting guys in their like 16, 18, unranked range, like those are guys that are going to be good prospects in other systems. They're just so deep right now. And so the first name that came out was Cesar Prieto, and people were freaking out saying, okay, it's another infielder. Why would they do that? I don't get why the Cardinals would trade for an infielder. They don't need another one. They need pitching. Okay, I get that. But a common theme with all these deals I'm going to say is, in general, you want them to be going after players with high value. You want them to be extracting the most value possible from the players they're trading for. Not doing some whole, like positional need thing. I don't really love when you go that way with prospects. They were really trying to build organizational depth, and if the Orioles were offering the best prospects, then you go after that. So I indicated early in the morning that the Orioles were in on Jack Flaherty, as other just some intel there, and there was a chance that Dylan Carlson could have been packaged with him, but clearly that didn't work out, but Jack Flaherty was dealt. So you look at Cesar Prieto. He's a guy that has already been compared by some people to like a Brendan Donovan in the minor league. So again, when you do comparisons to big leaguers, you're always getting yourself into a little bit of a tricky situation because it's hard to put expectations on them. But he reminds people of a Brendan Donovan in the way he plays right now. He's been pretty successful at the minor league level as well in AAA this year. He's at 868 OPS across both AA and AAA this year. And so he's a guy that Orioles fans were not loving that they gave up, but they understood because their deep farm system, they got to give up someone to get someone. But then you also got a Drew Rom as well, who projects to be more of a back end of the rotation starter. But again, he's a guy that has upside with strikeout stuff. Like, that's something, again, that the Cardinals continue to struggle with having enough of, is guys that can create swings and misses. And it looks like, at least from what I have seen of Drew Rom so far, he's got that. So again, he's not going to be some like elite prospect or hoping for a back end of the rotation, if not long relief type guy. But he's close to big league ready. His stats aren't that great this year. 5.34 ERA over 86 innings with 100 strikeouts. One minor note I would make with that is if you look kind of like all the pitching prospects around baseball, especially the top guys, especially like top guys from like an MLB.com or something like that, a lot of them are struggling this year. So you shouldn't put a ton of stock into ERA. It's definitely an indicator, but when you guys are at that level, a lot of times they're working on stuff. They're trying to develop at how they pitch, not necessarily the results all the time. Obviously, a 5.34 ERA isn't something you should be excited about, but it shouldn't be an immediate turn off to guys. But then the real prize of the package, it seems like in people's eyes, and again, he's not the headliner, but he is the guy that he might end up being the best player in the deal, was reported afterward, and it's 19-year-old Zach Showalter, who's been pitching in Class A, and he was in rookie ball this year as well. It's a 2.37 ERA across the two levels this year. Again, I don't know a ton about him other than that he's pretty much a lottery ticket prospect at this point. I'm going to read a tweet from my friend Kareem here, who does some great Kareem Season on Twitter, or SSN on Twitter, does some really great prospect analysis. But he talked about how Showalter is a teenage pitcher with serious upside. His arsenal is headlined by a mid-90s FF, or so fastball with ride thrown from a low slot. He also has a high 70s slider and a changeup. He's an elite 35.1% whiff rate in 20 innings at single A this year. So that's very encouraging. And for him to be the third guy, the throw-in prospect in a deal, you gotta love that. So overall, Jack Flaherty deal, I think people got their hopes up a little bit at times with their package. I kind of thought the Cardinals would end up packaging one of their young bats with one of these guys like a Dylan Carlson to try and get higher-end prospects, but it didn't end up happening. That's okay. And so the returns, I think, are decent. The Cardinals have really upgraded their farm system. They didn't get any top prospects necessarily, but they did get some really solid guys. So again, another deal they made this day, Paul DeJong for Matt Savison. Not a ton to say here other than Savison, he's 24, so he's pretty old for being in high A. He was literally just promoted to double A a few days ago, so he hasn't pitched there yet, but he's a 1.11 ERA, 0.93 whip, 10.9 K per nine in 26 appearances in high A this year. He wasn't ranked in the Blue Jays top 30 prospects, but he's a guy that they thought highly of. So again, do you think he's going to be an elite closer one day? No. But do you think he'd be a quality reliever? Yeah. And for a guy like Paul DeJong, who, if you went into the season, most people probably would have been like, oh, they're going to DFA him. They need to release him, trade him for a bucket of balls, people would say. Like, you got a reliever that could potentially contribute maybe next year, if not 2025. That's nice. So you like what you get there with that. And then let's look at the Toronto deal real quick. So you got Adam Culverstein and Sem Roberson. So let me go with Sem here first. Sem's an interesting prospect as well. He's got a low 90s fastball. He's got a sweeper. Again, he's another back-end starter, potentially out of the pen. And then Culverstein, he's a guy who's a pretty good K percentage, good ground ball rate as well. Low, sometimes mid-90s fastball. Low 80s slider that has some good whiff to it as well. So he's a guy, again, who could factor into the back end of the rotation for the Cardinals at some point. And again, when you're looking at rentals that aren't like going to be getting huge, I mean, Jordan Montgomery and actually Jack Flaherty and Hicks could get good deals in free agency, but they're not like the headliners, right? They're not an Aaron Nola or Julio Urias or Blake Snell or whoever. Like, they're not going to bring, or Max Scherzer or Justin Verlander, they're not going to bring in top prospects unless you pair some other stuff with them. So to get organizational depth and a lot of it, so you have a lot of options who could potentially pan out, that's a good thing. There's a major difference between having 3 or 4 arms in your organization that you're like, they could pan out, to having 6, 7, 8, potentially more arms in your system that could factor into your rotation. So if 1, 2, or even 3 of these guys work out between the new acquisitions and some of the Cardinals' internal depth, that helps build out a rotation long term. So are any of these guys really going to be huge factors in 2024? Probably not, but they help the club long term, and I'll get some more into that as well. So then you have Tekoa, Roby, Thomas Sagassi, John King. So John King's kind of a thrown-in. He's a guy that has gotten some run at the major league level. You'll probably see him a lot in St. Louis this year. We'll see what happens with him. Thomas is a guy that's really interesting in terms of the bat he brings. John Mozeliak himself called him a guy that's very similar to Brendan Donovan, so he was pretty excited about him. I'll have to check on where Cardinals' top prospects rank. I think he slotted in as the number 8 prospect on MLB.com for them. Yes, he does. And Sem ranks 6. And then Roby, who's the guy that I would be really looking at from this deal that they got for Jordan Montgomery, slots in as the Cardinals' number 4 prospect now. He's a guy that I would be keeping my eye on. He's got an arm injury, and so he hasn't pitched since June, so he's going to be going over to Jupiter to rehab a little bit. But he's a guy who just has really interesting stuff. He was the number 11 prospect in the Rangers system. Now he's the Cardinals' number 4, which kind of shows you kind of the lack of depth the Cardinals had in their system. They had really high upside guys at the top, but then after that fell off pretty quick. He had a 5.03 ERA in 10 games in AA, so he wasn't killing it in AA necessarily. But he's a guy that I think Fangraphs has as their 63rd ranked prospect in all of baseball. There's other outlets that really like him as well. He's a young guy who has really good stuff. And he's a guy that you're going to want to look at long term. Again, he's not going to factor in this year, but the mid-90s fastball, a really good cutter, slider, changeup mix. He's got a really good strikeout to walk ratio. He's a guy you want to watch. And then Sagassi is a guy who's been hitting at pretty much every level he's been at. He's not like an elite defender by any means, but he can play multiple infield positions. He's had like over 130 WRC plus pretty much at every level. He's a guy that you're really going to like. And then once he makes it to St. Louis, he's probably, again, he's not going to be a superstar, but he could be a really helpful impact player. So overall, the Cardinals built out their depth in their farm system, which is huge, not only for the future of this club in 2024 and beyond, more likely 2025 and beyond with these names, but it also helps them potentially swing some deals in the offseason. A couple things to think about with this is that John Mozeliak has come out and said, even after the deadline in his comments with media, that the Cardinals have 3 rotation spots to fill this offseason, and it's going to have to come through free agency. It's going to have to come through trade. And if they want to significantly upgrade their rotation, they can't just go out and sign 3 guys, and they can't just go out and trade 3 guys. They're going to have to mix and match a little bit here. And so, sure, I would expect one of the core, or maybe 2 of the core young Cardinal bats that are already in the major leagues to be on the move in this offseason to get that pitching. But then some of these guys or some other Cardinals prospects could be in those deals as well, which helps them have the capital to go after the pitching they want, whether it's a high-end guy like a Dylan Cease or a Logan Gilbert, or even one of those other Seattle pitchers like a Bryce Miller or Brian Wu, or whoever's available out there. They need prospect depth to go out and make a trade, but then they also need prospect depth because they're going to have to make a trade regardless, and they can't just totally deplete their farm system either. They have to continue to think about the future, even if they don't have to completely think about it, but you always have to have a little bit of an eye on it. But something that they have in their back pocket this year of all years is they're going to have a really good draft pick this year. When was the last time we saw the Cardinals potentially picking in the top 10 of the MLB draft? And with the way Randy Flores has been drafting in recent years, you've got to love the idea of him having elite draft capital at the top of the first round, and then also having top end of every round draft picks, high signing pool bonus so that they can go after some high upside guys and maybe do some over slot deals. They can get really creative this year in a way that they typically don't get to. They usually kind of have to like hope a Jordan Walker or a Mason Wynn or a Tink Hentz or Chase Davis from this last year. They have to hope that those talents fall to them so they can snap them up. And this year, they get to be in prime range for some arms or some bats that they typically are never in the position to draft. And so I like this deadline, and I like kind of no one likes where the Cardinals are at in terms of falling apart this year, but I like thinking of 2024, the fact that they'll have potentially a really good draft to work off of that can help transform their system even more, allows them to be aggressive with their moves. So overall, I really like the deadline. Did it blow me away? No. But did I think they did really well with what they had to do? Yes. And that was even a question mark on deadline day. People were worried that Jack Flaherty wasn't going to be dealt, and would it have been the worst thing in the world to give him a qualifying offer? No. But Mozeliak himself raved about the package they got, which you would expect him to. They're not going to be like, oh, we traded Jack Flaherty for nothing. Like, they're not going to say that, but they apparently really liked it. They thought the package they got in return was worth 3 times what a comp pick would be worth. So that's encouraging, hopefully. Overall, I'd say be encouraged, Cardinal fans, about the deadline. Again, no one can really know about prospects, right? Look at the Nationals and the Juan Soto deal. They could end up getting no impact big leaguers that change the organization for Juan Soto. They have a lot of really high upside guys, like James Wood is really high upside. Mackenzie Gore still has promise. There's guys that they got in return, Robert Hassel, that could be something, but how often do we see these mega deals where the prospects don't turn out? And then it's the guys like a Zach Allen or a Sandy Alcantara, or guys that Cardinal fans don't care about getting rid of in the moment. And then years later, they end up being some of the best starters out there. So again, when you're dealing with rental players, you kind of got to play with what the market gives you if you're going to deal them. I think the Cardinals capitalized pretty well. I really like that they waited out the Jack Flaherty situation. I don't know what deals they had on the table beforehand, but it got to a point where the Orioles and Dodgers and kind of the Reds, even though I don't think they ever went after Jack Flaherty, but there's teams with minutes left on the board that have to make a deal for a starter, and so the Cardinals are able to capitalize on that. I like their deals overall, and we'll be talking to hopefully later this week or early next week someone that is way more in tune with prospects than I can be, and talk more about the returns in the Cardinals farm system as a whole. We'll continue to talk about the Cardinals farm system and bring on some really great guests about that over the next few weeks and months. We'll continue to cover what the Cardinals could be doing in the future as well. I want to keep this one as short as I could to just cover the deadline. We'll get more into what the offseason will look like in the future. But overall, again, I like the deadline. I would stay tuned to Redbird Rants because we'll continue to cover those. I'll have grades for all the trades coming out here pretty soon. I know you can kind of get my vibe from it, but if you want to hear me give a little bit more thought to each of them, we can do that as well. And then again, stay tuned. I don't know exactly when the interview will release that I'm doing tomorrow, hopefully within the day, but I might save it a little bit as well. So it's really exciting. I'm not just saying that to say it. It's a really exciting prospect from the Cardinal system that's made noise this year. Really excited for him to talk about his ascent this year and to give us a little bit more insight into a future Cardinal right there. And so, again, thanks for your patience with the podcast. Being a little inconsistent recently. Hopefully this episode and then a couple others I already have in the docket and future episodes will make up for it. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy this podcast, and share it on Twitter, or Facebook, or Instagram, or whatever you use it. Helps get the word out there, helps the podcast out a ton. So if you like what it is, please share, subscribe, like it, all the things. Feel free to email me, which that's in the notes below. Let me know how things are going. And I appreciate you all. So that's been the Redbird Rundown. I'm Josh Jacobs, and I'll catch you next time.